All right, can everybody see me? Can y'all see it over here? This way? All right, so welcome back from break, guys. So today we're actually going to be doing a little bit of notes. It's called The History of Fashion. This is going to prepare you guys for your third project. So we're on our third project now. The first one was illustrations. The second one was designing your two jackets, just the paper jackets. And then the third one is going to be one based off of this, okay? Now, there's a lot of history that goes in the history of fashion, but I'm just really going to go over where we started as far as manufacturing fashion to where we are today. Okay, so that's kind of what we're going to be talking about today. It's not going to be too long. And I'm going to tell you guys about your project, okay? We are nearing January, which is my busy season, and I'm excited to hire some interns, and I want to hire them from you guys. And then also, we're going to be learning fashion design very soon, which is sewing and draping and pattern making and all that stuff. So it's a lot of information, but I feel like first I want to give you guys this information first. All right. So we're going to start with the history of fashion. Manufactured clothes. So before the 1800s, nearly 2/3 of clothing was handmade. So before the 1800s, almost everybody knew how to make their own clothes. You did not go to a store to buy clothes. If you went somewhere, you went to a tailor or you went to a seamstress. So those were very popular. Now you hear, oh, do you have a seamstress? It's very rare that people are seamstress and tailors now, but back before the 1800s, that's all there were. And if you weren't rich enough to hire a tailor or a seamstress, you knew how to sew yourself. You were behind that sewing machine yourself. So everybody before the 1800s knew how to sew. Now the first manufactured clothes were actually made for sailors, and they were called slop shops. So you see these like shorts here. The first manufactured clothes were actually shorts for sailors, and they were like shorts that fit everybody. So they didn't have any particular sizes like we have now, small, medium, large, extra large. They had one size and you had to take it and you had to fix it yourself. There was no small, medium, or large. And then actually the second manufactured clothes were for slaves. So slaves, back in, America's history, they wore very simple, long garments. And so these clothes were actually manufactured because it was cheap and because it used really cheap clothes and it was like cheap styles. So the actual first manufactured clothes were for slaves and for sailors. And that's kind of what started the production of clothes. Okay, now this is a guy, his name is Ebenezer Butterick, and he created standardized patterns. Raise your hand if you know what a pattern is. Okay, a little bit of people know what a pattern is. So a pattern, and I actually put this picture here. So what a pattern is basically a flat sketch of a garment before you design it. And so before Ebenezer Butterick came onto the scene, you would make your own patterns at home. So there was no standardized small. This is a small for everyone. This is a medium for everyone. You kind of had to figure out what your size was and you made a pattern for yourself. But he went ahead and he created standardized patterns. So if you wanted to make a skirt, you could go to his store, and I put a little store here. This is called Butterick Patterns. You could go to a pattern store and buy a pattern and make the clothes at home. So that was very popular too. You would buy yourself a pattern. Let's say you wanted a nice dress. You would go to a store, buy a pattern, and then take that pattern home and make it yourself. So Ebenezer Butterick, he was the pioneer of making patterns. And so after patterns started going on the scene, the Civil War made way for uniforms. So after sailors' clothes, slaves' clothes came uniforms. So uniforms were the first thing to be mass produced because, everyone was going to war. Everyone needed to look the same. And so at that point, that's when they started to make all these clothes because uniforms are all very similar. So eventually, after uniforms, came men's suits, and then came women's clothing. Okay, so that's when production started to get big. And you guys see the date here? What's the date Someone tell me? What's that first date by his name? 1863. So this is in the 1800s, following the 1900s. So before this, you couldn't buy clothes in the store. You had to make it yourself. You had a sewing machine at home. Okay? So everybody could look good now and the rich people actually did not like this. When clothes started to become manufactured more, poor people could go and buy the latest style, right? And so now rich people were like, we don't want poor people to just be able to buy styles like this. And they started calling them, bad names because they were doing this. Because they're like, oh, well, just because she makes $3-4 a week, she shouldn't be able to buy this. But that's one thing that mass production changed, was the fact that everybody could look good for a lower budget. So that was good for a time, for a season. All right. So after that, the 1860s came the production boom. You don't have to write all this down, but just know that there was a production boom in the 1880s. Okay. So this manufacturing investments went from $8 million to $22 million. And this was in a span of like 20 years. So once patterns were made, uniforms were manufactured, and regular clothes started to be manufactured, there was a huge boom in manufacturing, period. And American advertising worked to transmute the dissatisfaction of the working class, because actually people did not like this, because people used to make clothes at home, and there's a lot of gratification and sense of self when you're making clothes at home. But now that the clothes were so easy to buy in the stores, people weren't making anything at home anymore. And now everything was in a factory, and factory work is actually pretty dull, and it's actually not very meaningful as making something from start to finish. So let's read this. It says, American advertising worked explicitly to transmute the dissatisfaction of the working class away from social reform and toward consumerism. Okay, and this year opened the door for consumerism. Do you guys know what consumerism means? Anybody know? So consumerism basically means just buying a lot of products. So back in the day, you would make your own clothes at home, but now that clothes are manufactured, it opened the door for people to buy, and buy. And that's what American advertising wanted. They wanted people to buy more clothes, buy more clothes, buy more clothes, buy more clothes, because it was so easy to manufacture now. So gratification that used to come from meaningful work could now be purchased. With the rise of assembly line style manufacture, work itself became a dull, monotonous task. Okay, so people didn't like working in these factories and making clothes. It actually is very boring. It's actually very dull, and that's why not a lot of people know how to do it or actually want to go work in a factory. And that's why we outsource all of our products to different countries. Right. So again, meaningful work turned into a dull, monotonous task. So here's a picture of a factory back in the 1900s. Raise your hand if you would ever want to work in one of these factories. None of us want to, right? It doesn't look very happy or appealing or anything like that. But this was the boom of the industrialized revolution. And so everybody thought that more was better. They're like, more clothes for cheaper. That has to be the best solution. But sometimes you realize that more is not always the best. So the history of fast fashion. So this is just kind of another timeline. 1800s, all fashion was slow. What does slow fashion mean? Anybody know? So slow fashion means one person goes buys fabric, sits at the sewing machine, and makes a garment from start to finish. Okay, that's slow fashion. So all fashion was slow. Everyone made their own clothes. Everyone knew how to make their own clothes. Mid-1800s, the Industrial Revolution came. People started wearing clothes for style, not necessity. 1911, the emergence of sweatshops came. The first significant garment factory disaster took place. 146 garment workers, mainly female, died in a fire. So we're going to talk about this more too. There was a lot of factory accidents because the conditions overseas for these sweatshops were terrible. And they would make people work for like, $1 a day, and everybody was, in a big factory working, and you couldn't get to leave. You had maybe 5-10 minute breaks, and it was hard, and it was hot in there and stuff. And so there's more like sweatshop regulations now, but in the 1900s it was terrible because all they cared about was more, more, more. Make more, make more, make more so we could sell more. Okay. 1960s, the abundance of cheap, mass-produced, low-quality clothing took over. Shopping for new clothes became a hobby and a means for achieving status. 1990s, the term fast fashion was coined by the New York Times after Zara implemented an accelerated production model from the design stage to clothing stores. So 1990s to now, that's when fast fashion, and that's when, you guys are born into fashion, and that's pretty much all you guys know. That's all you guys know is going to the store and buying clothes, and there's nothing wrong with that, but there is a better solution. So now, despite consumers wanting to make more sustainable choices, fast fashion is still booming with clothes being produced more quicker than ever before. So fast fashion is still happening. There's still big factories overseas. We're still producing lots of clothing for very cheap. And you guys know that because if you just go to Walmart, you can still buy a shirt for $5. All right, you can go ahead. Unsafe working conditions. So this is in Bangladesh. This is a 13-year-old working in a textile factory. So overseas, there's still not a lot of regulations on the age that you work. So kids still work in textile and clothing factories. And this is in 2013. More than 1,000 people died in a factory collapsing because the factory was just so old. And that was like huge. That was huge news, especially for the fashion industry. And it was really, really eye-opening to see how these conditions of people working were. But it's such a big industry that fashion production keeps going on just like this. And here's another map that I want you guys to see. This is a world map of clothing exports. So what's the biggest clothing export? China, right? You guys see that? What's like the second biggest? What do y'all see? So we see China has $158 billion worth of clothing exports. What's next? This is the next one. I think the next one is Bangladesh, $33 billion. Vietnam, $28 billion. India, $17 billion. So do you see why fast fashion keeps going? It's a lot of money here, right? Italy, $25 billion. Germany, $24 billion. Netherlands, $13 billion. The U.S., we're up there. Look how much we're making, $6 billion. So imagine the U.S. only makes $6 billion from clothing, where China makes $158 billion. So do you see where we get our clothes? We get our clothes mostly from China and Bangladesh. And look, this is your normal JCPenney's thing you can go find. Your shirt, Gap, $40, made in Indonesia. T-shirt, $20, made in Indonesia. Bangladesh, China. Jacket, Bangladesh. Dress, Cambodia. Tights, China. Shoes, Vietnam. So everything that we buy here doesn't really come from the U.S. or help the U.S. in any type of way. Okay. Keep going. There should be one more. All right. Fast fashion purchasing habits. So even though we don't produce the most clothing, who buys the most clothing? Based off this map. The U.S., yeah, the U.S., we buy the most clothing. Look at it. So the U.S. we purchase, so one shirt equals 4 items. So that's over, I don't know, that's a lot of shirts. And then average price per item, can you go back? Average price per item is $16. So we still purchase the most amount of clothes out of everybody in the world. And then I think after us comes China, maybe, then Japan, then the UK, and then Norway. But yeah, so we buy the most clothes still. And there's nothing wrong with buying more clothes or buying clothes. I think the biggest thing I want you guys to see is the UK and Norway. So they spend more on their clothes, but they buy less. And that's kind of what I want you guys to see is moving forward, it's okay to buy clothes, but buy quality clothes and buy less of it. And so if we started to buy more quality clothes and less of it, that would actually help the emissions that go into the world and all of the other stuff too, because we're not buying so much just random little things that we might just wear once and never wear again. When I buy clothes, I like to buy for quality, so I know I can wear it 5, 10, 15 times and still like it, instead of buying, a little $5 shirt here, $10 shirt there, and then I wear it once and it's ruined. So I want to show you guys with that. So where are we headed? So I don't want to sound like a Debbie Downer because we are headed in a good direction. And this is something that I found on a really great article, but this is where my mind was headed anyways. So we started with mass production, right? That was 1870s. We started mass production. The 60s, 70s, computers, automation, robotics. The 2000s, internet, data analysis, connectivity. 2020, we're headed to mass customization, okay? Which means give your client more of an option of what they want to buy. And that way, you're not making as much clothing. So I call that the empowered customer. And this is actually what the model that I do in my business right now is I don't make anything until my client purchases it and they get to customize their outfit before they even buy it. Now, granted, the cost of that is more expensive, but I'm not just making clothes and I don't have an inventory left over. Everything that I make is specified for that client, and that way I know exactly how much fabric to buy, and I'm not overspending on fabric or supplies or anything else. I'm making exactly what's needed, and that's it. So that's where we're headed. We're headed to the empowered customer, where customers have more of a choice on what is made. We've reached the maximum level of garment production ever needed. We've reached that point. There's so many garment manufacturing companies, and we're already doing so much damage in the fashion industry that we don't need to make any more things. We really have enough clothes for hundreds to 200s of years. We really don't have to make any more clothes. But fashion is needed, and it's a source of expression of yourself. So I still love fashion. I think it's a great thing, but it's time to offer clients the option to customize their clothing so that we're using less clothing and we're not buying as much clothing. So that's really where I think we're headed. Any questions? Questions? All right, so that was my spiel for today. This is your project number 3, History of a Fashion Designer, okay? So this is your project that you're gonna go do. You're gonna pick a famous fashion designer, someone that you like, someone in the industry. They can be alive, they can be dead. It doesn't matter as long as they've been a fashion designer. They don't have to be from the US, they could be from anywhere else. Tell their history, where they're born, their early life, their fashion career, most memorable fashion achievement. And 3, illustrate a front and back design that is similar to their work, okay? So I have poster paper, so I'm gonna pass out poster paper to you guys. But this is your challenge for today, this Thursday and then Monday. And we're gonna have a great presentation. So you guys are gonna present your projects to the class. So we're gonna have some time to work on these, but this is your project, History of a Fashion Designer. There's so much information on fashion. I didn't want to bore you guys, so that's why you guys are going to do the work for me. Everyone's going to pick a different fashion designer, and then we're going to present on that. Yeah, so I'm excited about this. And then after this part of the section, we're going to start really hands-on designing. So I'm excited about that. Any questions on this so far? Awesome sauce. Let me turn this off. Hopefully it was Still going.